The next morning, as he sat up in his bed, he banged his head on the ceiling. He fell backward and his arm broke through the window. His small bed smashed to pieces beneath him. "What's going on?" he howled. During the night, he had grown. By thinking giant thoughts and dreaming giant dreams, he had actually grown. He stood up from his broken bed and hit his head on the ceiling again. He ran to the front door, squeezed out, breaking it to smithereens. Rit ran as fast as he could to the land of the giants, stopping every giant he saw to ask for his new friend, Remy. He approached Remy's home and pounded on the door frantically. "Remy," he yelled. "Remy, open it. Open up. It's me, Rit." Remy opened the door casually and looked at his friend. "Wow, you've grown." "I know I've grown," said Rit. "My house is destroyed. I don't fit in it anymore. I don't know what to do." "Well, the life you knew will never be the same," said Remy. "And this is just the first step in becoming what you say you want to become. It's up to you whether you want to keep growing. What would you like to do?" Rick closed his eyes and shrugged his shoulders and sighed, shaking his head back and forth. He looked up at Remy and said, "Well, I don't want to go back, and I definitely don't want to stay like this. I'm neither a giant nor a small. I want to keep going." Satisfied, Remy smiled and invited his little friend inside. "Let's eat some breakfast and we'll get to our next lesson." Rit walked into the biggest home he had ever seen. It was a home built for a giant. Remy invited him to sit at the table. Rit had never seen so much food. He was used to small pea soup and crackers, and here in front of him was more food than a small could imagine. Fruits and pastries, fresh meats, and the most excellent vegetables. Remy instructed him to eat all he wanted. There was more than enough. Rit ate and ate and ate. He ate the fruits, he ate the vegetables, he ate the meats and pastries, and as he did, he grew a little bit more. He asked, "Why am I growing?" Remy said, "Rit, a giant sees the abundance of the world. He's grateful for the things that a small doesn't even see. A giant knows there's more than enough of everything for everyone, and a small does not. There's enough to share, and if something runs out, I can produce more." Rit thought about what Remy said, and finished his meal, his belly bulging and his belt buckle loose. He had never thought about abundance. Smalls were always saying there wasn't enough of anything. He never considered the idea that if one thing ran out, he could make more. He was beginning to see the plenty that surrounded him. He stood up from the table and walked to the window. "Remy," he asked, "how is it that you have so much while smalls have so little?" "Follow me," Remy said. He walked steadily outside to a large garden. Rit followed. He had never seen such enormous plants and fruit trees. There were rows and rows of fruits and vegetables, and a small farm filled with animals. Rit asked Remy, "What are you doing?" Remy said, We are working in the garden. This is where the food you were eating came from. A giant works to earn the things that he or she has, and you, my friend, will be working with me today. We'll be pulling weeds, taking care of the plants, the fruit trees, and the animals." Suddenly, Rit noticed not only the plants, but the weeds. They were gigantic. How in the world could a small pull such big weeds and take care of such a large garden, he thought. Remy handed Rit some gloves and started working. Rit did too. He tugged and tugged on those weeds. At first, they wouldn't budge. His hands hurt and were swollen and blistered. A giant beetle jumped out. He fell over backward, trying to get out of the way. He started laughing as he realized they had no interest in him. Rit had never worked so hard in his entire life. The task felt impossible. But the more he worked, the stronger he got, the easier it became, and the bigger he grew. They spent the whole day working. Rit was covered in dirt and sweat and smelled worse than the animals. "You did well," Remy said. "It was hard for you at first, but the more you did, the better you got. A giant knows that when he starts something new, he won't be very good at it. If he's willing to keep doing it, his skills will improve until one day he can do it without thinking." "Remy, can I ask you something?" Remy said, "Yes." Rit said, "Can you?" "Yes," Remy said before Rit could finish. Rit looked at him confused. "How can you say yes if you don't even know what I'm going to ask?" Remy said, "There's nothing you can ask that's bigger than me. I can do anything you ask. The question is, will I?" Rit thought about that. There's nothing this giant can't do? That sounds impossible. How can he do everything? He's so stunned by Remy's answer, he had forgotten what it was he was going to ask. Rit was still thinking about what Remy had said when Remy spoke. Rit, you have the same gift. In fact, all Smalls and Giants can do anything. Smalls tell themselves all the reasons why they can't do something, and that keeps them from becoming giants. Remy and Rit continued working in the garden into the woods. In their deep conversation and hard work, they lost track of time. The sun went down, and it was time to head home. As they walked through the forest, Rit couldn't see his hand in front of his face. He cautiously felt his way through the trees and vines. Rit's pants snagged on a thorn, and he fell behind. He heard a flutter. His heart started pounding. His stomach got tingly. A twig cracked nearby, and the hair on the back of his neck stood up. He imagined all of the frightening things that could be around him. Suddenly, something brushed across his face. He screeched, swinging his hands wildly in front of him to get it out of the way. He broke away from the thorn and started running wildly through the trees. He wondered what kind of creature was trying to get him, never realizing that his frightening encounter was just a leaf hanging from a branch. Rit could hear Remy walking in front of him, but couldn't see him. He followed as quickly as he could. It felt like he was walking forever in the darkness, but he kept moving. He didn't want to be left behind. As he caught up to Remy, tattered from the woods, Rit said, short of breath, "You didn't seem afraid as you walked through that. You just kept going." Remy turned. "Rit, I do get afraid occasionally, but a giant keeps moving and doesn't allow fear to keep him from doing what he can do. Giants know that allowing fear to overtake them can make them smaller." This was a new thought for Rit. He knew he could grow, but hadn't considered the idea that fearful thoughts could make him shrink. Smalls allow their imaginations to create scary stories about all the bad things that could happen. Giants put positive things in their minds and move forward despite their fears. A giant knows that all fears are stories that we've made up. We can make the stories as scary or as beautiful as we would like. If I'm in a place that I don't know, or that might be scary, I make up a positive story in my mind and things turn out just fine. That was a relief to Rit. He liked the idea of making up new stories and certainly didn't want to shrink. Making new narratives sounded fun, so instead of imagining all the scary things in the darkness, he simply made up a new story. In place of terrifying creatures and monsters, he pictured happy little animals playing hide and seek in the dark. He imagined them laughing and telling stories and thoughts of him joining them in the silliness. And as he visualized this, he grew. So I think we're going to pause there for a minute. So a couple of messages inside of that. One is that there's plenty for everybody. There's an abundance in the world. And if something runs out, we can create more. And so the idea that there is plenty for everyone, whereas Smalls think there's not enough for anyone. And you see the difference in behaviors there. The other is that a giant can do anything. Smalls tell themselves all the reasons why they can't do things, but giants tell themselves all the reasons why they can. And then it becomes a matter of will they or won't they. And then the final thing is fear. You know, giants feel fear, but they work through it and they create stories that are positive and uplifting and they work through it. Whereas if they were to succumb to the fear, they can shrink. And so we live in a time right now where there's some fear in the world. And so we have an opportunity to become giants and to look at it a little differently. Like I said, to get above it and to think differently and to become giants and to let the fear kind of be present, but be courageous.